Uju in the noe magnadok. Anin. Kaagegaabaw in the Janakas. Mekanak and do them. Mekanak wajawing and dunjaba. Beshogakabakang and danongom. Apachigomi wech bizendawieg. And what I said there was a traditional Ojibwe protocol greeting. I said, hello, all of my relatives. My name is Kaagegaabaw. I'm Turtle Clan. I'm a descendant of Turtle Mountain. I live close to Minneapolis today, and I wanted to thank you all for tuning in and listening to this live conversation with James Kaagegaabaw. I so look forward to doing these on Friday afternoon. And if you take a few moments out of your day to talk about, to discuss, to listen to Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Nakaway, Soto, language, culture, history, philosophy, ethics, spirituality, this is something I love speaking about. And for years, I did a program called Ojibwe Word of the Day live. And on Thursday nights, I loved looking at a particular word and seeing again, the teaching, the philosophy, the ethics, the spirituality that was embedded in so many of these words. And I thought of what I would speak about this week. And it actually happened while I was making a post. It was on Manidoo Gizasoons. It was the name for December, for this month, for this moon. And in Ojibwe, this is called Manidoo Gizasoons. It is the little spirit moon. And I was coming up with something, again, poetic to add to my post. And as I was thinking about the depth of that name, Manidoo Gizasoons, and I really started going deep on it. And as I was doing that, Migizi, the bald eagle, flew by in my backyard. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take note here and pay attention to what I'm thinking about, to what I'm discussing in my head. And it was about Manidoo Gizasoons. And again, when I was discussing with my wife what I would speak about in today's program, I said, well, I think I'm going to talk about the name for December, Manidoo Gizasoons. And as I was doing that, I'm not even kidding, Migizi, it's the Ojibwe name for bald eagle, again flew by. And I'm like, okay, let's speak about what this word means, Manidoo Gizasoons. So Manidoo can have a couple of different meanings. It can mean spirit. It can also mean mystery. And when we have Gizis, this could be like the sun. If it's Dibiki Gizis, it's the moon. And when we have the diminutive suffix on it, uns, it makes it little. So Manidoo Gizasoons it's the little spirit moon. Some dialects might have this as Manidoo Gizis, as the spirit moon. And I thought about, well, what does that word Manidoo really mean? And what I love about it is that it's, for me, in my perspective of that word and its meaning, it's fundamentally agnostic. And I found a grandfather teaching that helps describe this. Debwe, truth. So again, Manidoo can mean mystery. It can mean spirit. It can mean something that I think can't be totally defined or even comprehended by thought. And in turn by language, which is, for me, the sound of our thoughts. So this word, Manidoo Gizasoons, the little spirit moon, and we look at that word Manidoo for spirit. I thought of the grandfather teaching that we have for truth, Debwe. He or she speaks the truth. It's a verb. It's something you do. It's how you act. It's how you relate. And in one interpretation of Debwe, and this came from the late Anishinaabe linguist Basil Johnson, for him it had Dabe, which was to a certain extent something that cannot be surpassed. You can't go beyond it. It's a particular point you've reached. So it's that Dabe, and then there's way to speak. For him, Dabe way was to speak to a certain extent. It means to relate that whatever you've seen, whatever you've heard, whatever you've witnessed, whatever you've been a part of, you can speak that. And for you, that's your truth. I can speak my truth to you from my perspective. Yet that may not be the whole truth, the entire truth, and nothing but the truth. It's spoken to the furthest extent that you can go. And I thought that's a very beautiful way of describing the truth. And when I applied that to spiritual traditions all over the world that have examined truth, be it the Buddha, Jesus, Lao Tzu, for them, truth is something eternal. It's not subject to the laws of change. It's always been this way. So when I applied that word, debwe, to speak to a certain extent, along with the eternal nature of truth, for me, that Ojibwe interpretation, the spiritual interpretation of it is, I cannot define the eternal to you. If you're using words, which are the sounds of our thoughts, you're using the wrong tool for the job. Truth is something that has to be experienced. It has to be lived. I can't define it to you. I can try to describe it, but I can't define it. And I love how I think the language is actually censoring itself there. So when I applied this to that word, Manidoo, spirit, mystery, what I love about this is that the culture and the spirituality is making no effort at all to define a spirit, to define the creator, to define the mystery, the great mystery, the benevolent mystery. And I think that's so smart, because the moment we do that in our minds, we've already kind of blocked ourselves off from what the potential is. And we put on like these mental blinders, and we have this idea of what God is, or what is spiritual. And I think the language is trying to tell us it's something way more vast and expansive than you're going to be able to come up with your thoughts and your words. Once you experience it, it becomes something ineffable, something that can't be described by words, by thoughts. And those things that are ineffable, it's not just resign or set aside for the mysterious. When I think about things that are ineffable, things that can't be defined or described using words, I have numerous things in my daily life that I can't define. Like, I can't describe the taste of water to you. I can't use words, a song, poetry, or a painting to define that love that I feel for my son when I'm dropping him off at school, when I'm putting him to bed at night. There are no words for it. It's not coming from there, it's coming from here. There are no words to describe the flavor of a strawberry, of a medicine. Anything I say to you will never come close to the actual process of tasting that medicine, of the odeamin, the heartberry of a strawberry. So there are all sorts of ineffable things in our lives. And I like how the language has said, this too is ineffable. There was a description I heard from an elder who was giving a talk on star knowledge. And he was describing constellations, and he was an elder, and already there was a woman in the audience who was his elder. She was very traditional. Because of her age, she was probably raised by Gété Anishinaabe, by old-time indigenous people who had been born in lodges. And she asked him the question, how did you learn the names of these constellations? And he said, well, I came from an area in northern Canada where we still use these names for the constellations. Now, those words, that word and that name in Ojibwe for star is Anung, and they're animate beings. Again, I would speak about Anung the same way I would my wife, my child, my mother, any relative. And she asked, "Do you know the names of all of those stars? They're animate beings. Each one would have a name." And I liked how she was putting into perspective how limited our knowledge can be in such matters. That, of course, it is totally unreasonable to expect to know the name of every star. The human mind can't do it. There are limits to our knowledge. And I've always remembered that, and I use that when I think of things that are spiritual. Want to do that. Maybe my thoughts and my words can't comprehend the vast greatness of it. So when we use a word like Manidoo, that's one of the things that they're discussing. It's mysterious. I'm not trying to define it. It'd be a futile task to do it. It would come up dreadfully short in any kind of definition I attempt. And I think that's really important because, again, we can get hung up. And I know that Anishinaabe aren't the only people to have this realization. Spiritual traditions all over the world, I believe, have come to the same conclusion. For example, if you look at the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says that the Tao that can be spoken of, it's not the eternal Tao. And in the Hindu faith, speaking about spirit, they're like, if you're speaking about it, you don't know about it. It's only when you're not speaking about it that you can possibly know. And I really think in this word, Manidoo, that's what we're talking about. It can't be comprehended by thought. And when we look at that ancient word for creator, for God, for lack of a better term, Manidoo will show up in there. It'll show up when new spiritual traditions will arrive here in Mikanako Minising, here on Turtle Island, and they'll look for a word, sacred. And I know I use that word in English a lot, particularly in some of these talks. And when they were trying to translate this word, there really wasn't a literal translation for sacred in Ojibwe. They would say Manidoo. It is thought to be mysterious. Again, it's something that I don't totally understand. It's mysterious, it's spiritual. For them, it wasn't the same as sacred, but it was saying that this is a special area. This is something that has special properties. They're mysterious. And when then they try to translate that term into God. And so they'll use Gichimanadu, which is great spirit. Another, though, the old school way of saying that is Gije Manadu. Now, Gije can mean kind, loving, showing unconditional love, loving kindness, and then Manadu. So this wasn't a, Old Testament description of God. I think the spirit that they're speaking about here is the kindest, the most benevolent, the benevolent mystery, the kind spirit, that whatever it is that's animating us must be fundamentally good. And that description of good is something that is kind, something that can show unconditional love. So Kije Manadu was one of the old words for that. And that's where that Manadu word shows up. And yeah, and so when I was thinking about this word, what does this really mean this month? Manidoo Gizesuns, the little spirit moon. And I thought of that word, Manidoo. I thought, well, that is something that is for me absolutely fascinating. And it led me ultimately, because they didn't have, that word for spiritual or for sacred. They're also looking for that word for faith. And, earlier I spoke of Debwe. It's one of our sacred laws. It's one of our grandfather teachings. He or she speaks the truth. And when I looked at that word for faith that I found in Berge's dictionary, um, it was Debweendum. Debweendum. And in that word, it was a contradiction. There's a contradiction, a paradox, if you will, going on. And I thought, oh, that's interesting that they would use this complete paradox. And I'll tell you in a moment why it is a paradox when you look at what the word actually has in it. And then it almost like it made sense. So Debwe, it's almost like I can't define the eternal to you. I'm speaking the truth, but I can only speak to a certain extent. And then aindum is to think. So in one interpretation, in my interpretation of it, it's I am thinking about that which cannot be thought of. It's paradoxical. It's that's the word that they used for faith. And then I looked at it from this perspective of not being able to know. So for me, faith all of a sudden changed. It wasn't believing in, oh, there's the mega Z right there. It wasn't just adopting someone's belief. Faith at this point was that if I choose to lead a good life, minopamatsuin, if I choose to lead a life with debwewin, with truth, with saki ituin, with that compassionate, unconditional love, with dabasain dizuin, with humility, with manaji ituin, with respect, where I'm acknowledging the sanctity, the sacredness of my relatives' lives, with kwakwadism, with virtue, with righteousness, with honesty, leading a holistic life, with zungide ewen, strength of heart, with courage. I'll act with nipwakawen. I'll act intelligently. I'll act with wisdom. And for me, faith then became, I can't possibly know what my actions, how my actions will affect all of my relatives. I know Gidinoendaman. We are all related. And I use that term in Dinoe Maganatok. I'm addressing all of my relatives. Yet, and I can't possibly know how my actions will affect each and every one of them. I know they will, but I can't know how. For me, faith is knowing that if I act according to those sacred laws, if I act in a way that brings a good life, not just to me, but to all of my relatives, past, present, and future, then I know I can have complete faith without being able to see it, without being able to define it. I'll know that each one of my actions will be positively beneficial, not just for myself, but for someone coming 7 generations from now. And I liked how that became for me faith. That's how I act with faith, without possibly knowing how my actions will affect people. Trying to act in a good way. Also, not holding on to the outcome. And in turn, leading a life where I'm contemplating the eternal. So, mi wa kedo. That's all I'm going to say today. I'm going to take a moment and say, Apajigo Miigwech Bizendaoye. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this. Again, I love having a moment to speak to you all. And Nagasao and Guamazik, please, all of you, do take care. Miigwech Bizendaoye. Thank you for listening. And because it's Friday afternoon and I'm live on a couple of different platforms here, I'd love to take some questions if you have some observations. The few moments I have to visit with you all, it's wonderful. It's like having a a chance to visit with friends. Oh, miigwech bisandawyeg. Oh, and now I'm adjusting my phone so I can see. Again, miigwech bisandawyeg. Rob asked what direction. I start in Wabanong in the east. Someone just asked, how do you say snow in Ojibwe? That's an important one. Goon, goon. And that's different from it is snowing, which is zugipon. Zugipon is a verb. It is snowing. Goon is snow. South Africa? That's awesome. Miigwech bisandawyeg. Where would I begin explaining to granddaughters who have no background in these teachings where to start? For me, I if it's granddaughters, one might be the Mishomis book, which is a great book. It's a great place to begin. That is written for all ages, literally. And then also the grandfather teachings. You can start there. I think every human being, no matter what spiritual path you're on, will agree that living a life with truth, with honesty, with humility, with respect, with love, with courage, with wisdom is that's something that is universal amongst all spiritual paths. So that's where I begin. Oh, Pachigo Miigwech. Well, I'm going to wish you all a wonderful weekend. Again, Miigwech Bisandawyeg, thank you so much for listening today. Uh, I have always been delighted to have a few moments to speak to you all. And again, Miigwech Bisandawyeg, thank you for listening. Dagasawing Guamazig, please all of you do take care. And Banamamino Otis Abundamungigo Abundaman. And the spirit shall decide when we see each other again. Miigwech.